So I'm just going to very quickly tell you about some research that my students and I are doing in the lab to look at white sharks in this area. Because I'm really interested in this question, has white sharks declined in this area since the 1950s and 60s when Mundus was out there? And I mean, look at that. Do you think you could set a long line off New Jersey and catch white sharks like that today? I wouldn't think so. With all this fishing, I imagine their population may have gone down. There's one study that suggests there's been a decline in white sharks in the last 20 years of about 80%. But that study there's a lot of flaws, there's a very wide confidence intervals, and it's disputed. So I really want to figure out, can we concrete say these things have declined in our waters? So the way I go about doing that is using DNA. So just a very quick DNA concept. If you have a big population like this, you're going to have all kinds of genetic diversity. That's what all these colors mean. This is just a symbolic of genetic diversity. If you have a big population, you tend to have a lot of genetic diversity. Now, this might represent the situation in the 50s and 60s when there was a lot of white sharks. Now, if they got fished down or they declined to a significant level, you lose a lot of animals, and as a result, you lose a lot of genetic diversity. So, in a very broadly speaking, when you have a severe population decline like that, one hallmark of that is low genetic diversity. And we call that a bottleneck, a genetic bottleneck. So my basic question is do northeast US white sharks exhibit low genetic diversity? So that's the basic question, or exhibit evidence of this bottleneck effect. So these things are hard to come by. It's hard to get samples, but I've been working pretty hard, got about 40 or 50 samples of white sharks from caught or sampled in the last 10 years. I'm not going to go over this in any great detail, but I took these 40 odd white sharks from the US, I compared them with 19 white sharks from South Africa, and by all measures, we have low genetic diversity here, very, very low genetic diversity. Every measure I could think of had low genetic diversity. And I calculated a few statistics that kind of give you a measurement of whether there's been a bottleneck or not. It just spits out this number here called M. I won't go into any detail about it, but basically, when you have a big stable population, M is a certain range here, and when you're a very depleted population, M is down in this vicinity. So we looked at our data with the white shark, and of course it falls way down here with things like black bear, northern wombat, northern elephant seal, things that we know have declined quite a bit. So this provides some indirect evidence. This low genetic diversity suggests to me very strongly that they have declined. But it's just an inference at this stage. What I really want is a time machine, so I can go back to when Mundus was doing his thing, take genetic samples of the white sharks then, and then hop back in my time machine, come back now, compare it to here. Hell, if I had a time machine, I'd be selling it. I'd be a millionaire. I wouldn't be doing any of this. But anyway, I would like to compare the genetic diversity back then to now, because that would be direct evidence. I like indirect evidence, but I like direct evidence. So hopefully by listening to me for the last little whatever it's been, you might have come in here thinking that would be a monster, whereas hopefully now you think of it more as just a predator. I mean, you shouldn't go give one a hug and a kiss. It can definitely kill you and eat you if it wants to, but they usually don't. They're just a predator. And, you know, if you looked at the Coast Guard, you would think this thing's a threat because they issue advisories against it like hurricanes. But in reality, these things are not a threat. They're threatened. There's a lot more hooks and there's a lot more nets and a lot more of them are getting killed than they're killing us. So I think the white shark is something that we are living with in the ocean here. I don't think we need to worry too much about getting eaten by one, but I do think we need to worry a bit about conserving them. And as a top predator, these things are really a barometer for the state of the ocean. If the ocean is healthy, the ecosystem is healthy, then it can support these animals. So if we really want a nice healthy ecosystem out there, we should expect to be living alongside these animals. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
For the sharks, they seem to kind of go in the same migration patterns. Do you think that they go back to like their birthplace?
Well, it's funny you asked that. I'm actually not with white sharks, but I'm researching that with a species called lemon sharks in the Bimini Islands. And the first research I ever did on sharks was we would go out to these islands, we would catch newborn lemon sharks, and we put tags in them, we take genetic samples. This is in 1995 we started doing this. We catch every single one that's born in this island. And we've done that every year since 1995. And these things take 13 years to mature. So in 2008, we started going out and catching adults. And we would read them for a tag, and sure enough, several of them are the ones that were born back in the same place. They were pregnant and they were on their way in to give birth. Not only that, then last year we caught a bunch of babies and we genetically fingerprinted them and tested them against, we determined whether the females that were babies back in 1995, any of them were their mothers. And we found some cases where that was in fact the case. And the little babies were within 100 meters of where we caught the mother, 14 years ago. So yes, I do think they're going back to the place they're born.
When the female gives birth, do baby sharks just like swim away by themselves, or does it stay with the female, like teaching it how to pray? Because I know dolphins do that, but do they just like give birth and they're like, all right, goodbye?
The baby sharks, I've seen the birth of baby sharks, and they swim like heck to get out of there because the mother will eat them. So it's definitely, they're cannibalistic. There's absolutely no parental care. However, they're very good mothers because they gestate them for 2 years. I mean, that's longer than I was gestated, so that's pretty good maternal care. But once they're out, they're on their own. And they're little, perfectly fully formed little hunters.
So that they're off.
They're off. They have to learn it all themselves. That's why they lose weight. Because they probably have a little learning curve about, what types of prey to go after and the tactics for getting them.
But if they come on multiples, do they attack each other?
Well, the small ones are all the same size, so they wouldn't cannibalize one another. But there is a theory. Some people think that they do that they're born and they hang out together in little schools for a little while. That's not demonstrated. It's not proven, but it's not unreasonable to think that's potentially true.
For when you guys were like tagging them and tracking where they go with the satellite tags, how come the sharks by Massachusetts were hugging the coast?
Oh, well, I should point out I didn't do that. So why are they hugging the coast? That would be a great question. Who knows? It just is at this stage. You would think they would go out in the middle of the ocean like the other ones, but they apparently didn't.
Yeah, actually, kind of with that same question, did that study have any data on like the ages of those? Whether they were more juvenile coming down the coast? It's kind of like on the California.
They were actually all big ones. They were all adults, as far as I know, or very near. They weren't juveniles. These are all tagged off Chatham, Massachusetts, and they're pretty big. So yeah, that's the interesting thing, that they are not juveniles. Let's do some back row questions.
If you go back in time, like I said before, and go to any year to collect data for sharks, which year would you go back to?
Which year? Wow, that's a very specific question. For this particular study, I would go find out what day that long line with the 10 juveniles white sharks was on, and I would go to that day because I really want to find out if those were one litter that was hanging out, or two litters hanging out together. But that period, that's when there was probably a lot of them out there, and that would be good to get a good idea of how genetically diverse they were back then.
What do you think the risk is of the Northwest Atlantic population being eliminated from inbreeding depression? Is there enough genetic diversity for them to, surpass the inbreeding depression?
Right, so for those of you that don't, inbreeding depression is, you know what, hillbillies, inbred, crazy. Are we going to have these hillbilly white sharks because this genetic diversity is low? That's a good question. I mean, I think their genetic diversity is very low. Anyone here know what the Florida panther is? Florida panther is a subspecies of the cougar. So the Florida panther got down to 25 individuals, and they express all these strange genetic diseases as a result of low genetic diversity. So it's certainly possible in theory that this could happen to white sharks, and that's something that should be researched.
I read that they had a great white shark in captivity in Monterey Bay and recently passed away. Were you or other scientists able to extract valuable data off that terminal?
I don't think they've had 5 or 6 now, and I think they've all lived, and they release them. They only keep them when they're this big till when they're a bit bigger, and they actually usually release them when they start to show an unhealthy interest in other fish in the tank. Well, healthy for them, but unhealthy for the other fish.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Chapman.